Hi, everyone tuning in. My name is Jill Berkowitz. I'm the host of 160 Characters podcast. Some of you may also know me as part of the content team at Clerk Chat. And today joining me is Pete Bernard of Excelsior. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Excelsior.
Yes.
Welcome, Pete.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, Jill, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. So for those tuning in, Excelsior is Pete's own consulting company, but previously you were at Microsoft for over 10 years, I believe. So I'd love to just start there.
Okay.
In particular, I noticed your experience with Windows Phone, mobile products, followed by being 6-year director for Azure Edge. So would you consider the transition from Windows Phone to Azure Edge as a shift in focus? And also, how
Mm.
do you think your experience with mobile products then prepared you for your role as a director in Azure Edge?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So I was at Microsoft for 18 years, which was a long time.
Oh, I had the number wrong.
Mm. It is true, more than 10 years, but it was 18 years. And then I was at 14 years in Silicon Valley before that. So doing, kind of related things too. So it's been quite an arc, and I've really enjoyed with Excelsior, working with companies on their edge compute kind of initiatives, kind of where 5G, edge, and AI come together, and that's kind of my sweet spot. But the question you ask is quite relevant, I think, because I came into Microsoft as like a phone person. I came from Silicon Valley. I was working in embedded Java and handsets and over-the-air, systems to flash devices over cellular networks, working with telcos. And so when I came into Microsoft, they were just starting to put together this Windows Mobile at the time. They called it Windows Mobile Platform, and they were looking for people with phone expertise. And, that was me.
There you are.
So there I was. And when I came into it, I was like, wow, there's a lot of work to do here. And so we kind of got together eventually um, and launched a series of platforms there. And I also ran the Portable Media Center group, that product for a while, which turned into something called Zune. If you remember the Zune media player from the Guardian of the
Zoon.
Galaxies movies, he had a Zune player. It was like a little portable media player. So I was part of the core team on that with Jay Allard, and worked on a product called Kin, which was Microsoft's own phone, which was on the market for about 45 days. So that was a whole other discussion. But over time, and then eventually Microsoft decided to shut down the mobile business, and that's probably a whole other podcast. But if you think about it, edge devices, which are smaller compute devices that are connecting over networks to the cloud, it's kind of like phones, right? I mean, phones are compute devices connecting over cellular networks to the cloud. So for me, it wasn't a huge transition to get from one side to the other, especially from an engineering and technology perspective. I mean, it's semiconductors, it's radios, it's software, it's management, it's all that good stuff. It's just maybe it's in a metal box that's out in the field measuring water pressure, as opposed to in someone's pocket playing solitaire or something. So from a technological perspective, it's pretty similar. Obviously, the business models are quite different, right? Phones are sold typically through telcos or in sort of association with telcos, and we can talk about that, versus the whole go-to-market and channel for Edge is totally different and very complicated. But yeah, so pretty close.
I think it was a really cool story of the variety that you sort of covered, and you were able to use your knowledge to help Microsoft, really. And since then, you've moved on because you have your own skill set that you can now pass on to other companies and help other companies
Right.
excel in ways that you know how. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I
actually
like to
want to.
tell people that I helped Microsoft make billions of dollars, and I also helped them lose billions of dollars. So I kind of broke even. I think after 18, I kind of broke even. If you count, I did Windows on Snapdragon. That was another one of my big initiatives, which is on running Windows laptops on Qualcomm. And so, yeah, it's like, building up those experiences about success and failure, right, is really kind of what it's all about. And then being able to work with companies now and say, they want to do X. It's like, okay, we'll figure out how to do that without sort of making gigantic mistakes and doing it, in a certain way that will be successful. So yeah, no, it's great to be able to sort of harvest a lot of that kind of knowledge and experience for companies that are trying to make it in the edge space.
I also feel that with technology, like many other areas, I'm going to say marketing, even though technology and marketing are totally different, there has to be a sense of being willing to test and try. And you kind of learn from those tests and trying
Mm-hmm.
whether they're successful or not. And then you can take that knowledge and move forward. So
Right.
I like the fact that you're, willing to test and try and learn regardless of
Sure.
its
They,
outcome.
they say fail fast, the things like that. It's interesting. In the software business, I mean, we're kind of blessed with the ability to fail fast in the software business. We can recompile, we can ship out new code, we can deliver it over the air, we can fix bugs. We've gotten into this, I would say, bad habit of shipping out devices with software that's sort of like 90% there. And then as soon as you take it out of the box, right, what do? You get a software update to sort of actually make it ready to use. That's not a great habit, but that is one of the luxuries of being in the software business.
It's true. So now I'm thinking about you mentioning having been at Microsoft for 18 years. And so now that's
Mm,
taking me back. For me, 18 plus years was college for me. And it's taking me back down memory lane of all the different technology I've seen since and all the different milestones over my lifetime. So
mm,
I'm obviously going pre college. Most notably, I'd really have to mention seeing the world transition to the internet was a
hmm.
major moment of my life,
Yeah.
and probably the most transformative. My first access to email, I think it was Juno I used maybe.
Okay.
And then AOL. I actually still think it's
Well,
hilarious when I hear that, what is it, the modem handshake sound that
yeah, the
people
little
play
squawk
that,
thing.
yeah, the connection. I
I know.
always laugh when I hear that because it reminds me.
Yeah.
But I'd say in the last 20 years, I'm trying to think like since college. I started college in 98. On the consumer side, I'd really have to point out everything Apple because so much of my day is
Mm,
around that. I mean, I'm working on a Mac, laptop now. I've got my watch.
hmm.
I'm wearing my AirPods. I'm
I got
sitting
my.
here. Oh, you do too.
Sure.
I have my phone next to me, so I can't
Yeah.
ignore that. But I'm also going to point out other devices like a USB drive, which I relied on heavily when I first started
Mm,
teaching in like 2005-ish.
hmm.
And even in college, I think well, I'm trying to think now. In grad school, I definitely used it. And even Kindle, I think, was a really cool
Hmm.
um, tech advancement. But I know you've also seen so many awesome tech milestones. So if you
Right.
had to call out a particular tech moment or tech milestone, what might it be for
Yeah.
you?
Good question. It's interesting. We've been, as a society, pretty normalized to some pretty amazing tech, I would say, right? So, I mean, things that we were experiencing and when you were experiencing back in college, that were pretty amazing and unique are pretty, baseline today, right? And in fact, there's a lot of tech that, like you said, like the modem handshake and these other weird things that are anachronistic. Kind of interesting anecdote. I was in Vegas last week at Mobile World Congress. I went out, had a little kind of offsite with Intel to do some sort of brainstorming on the future. One of the other participants was a gentleman who he runs he's into like nostalgia. He's in the nostalgia business, and he runs an Instagram page called "Do You Remember?" And probably you might even follow this thing on Instagram, but the "Do You Remember?" and it's all these kind of nostalgia things about the modem sound and dial tones and stuff like that. And he's got like millions of followers. In fact, we went out to dinner and he's sitting there next to me. I mentioned Zune. And so he made a post about the Zune, as we were talking, and sent it out to his million followers about, do you remember the Zune? So there's a lot of tech in our collective history, like you said, that's kind of like triggers memories and experiences. But I think in terms of tech milestones, wow, there's been so many. One of the things that I think sort of I call it flip the bit on the way people use things is, if you think about cell phones, we had cell phones, right? We had the flip phones, we had what they call the T9, and people were sort of that little pad, and then I think when when the cellular networks got fast enough where the data, you could actually use this thing as a data connected device. I think that was a big one. That was a big one because it sort of created another screen for us to
Are
interact
you
with, for
talking
better or
about
worse.
a BlackBerry or a BlackBerry
Well, I'm just
concept
talking
or
about the
something
networks in
different?
general. Like we went to kind of
Ah,
like
okay.
3G. We kind of went to
Yes.
3G
Okay.
that kind of time frame, late to like 2006, 2008 ish. You know, we had the iPhone in 2007, but even before that, we had BlackBerry and we had other devices where
Right.
the cellular networks got good enough where this thing was like a legitimate screen, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
you could actually interact with and make use of. And in fact, as you know, yeah, BlackBerry was one of the first kind of screens that people were addicted to, besides the big monitor, right? So I think that was a big cut right there. And maybe I'm a little biased coming from more of the telco networking side, but that was a huge one. If I had to pick one, I mean, there's other things going on out there more obtuse that had impact on semiconductor fabrication and yada yada yada. But that one, making the cellular networks actually a legitimate data channel, um, I think that had a big impact on people. Uh, in developing nations too, where they were like, oh, now I'm connected. I don't need a PC or a Mac or whatever. I don't need a computer. I can just have this thing and I can get connected. I can do payments. I can message. I can, be connected to the bigger world over that. So the network connection itself, I think, being data capable was probably one of the big unsung heroes of the last 20 years.
Changed the world.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
now have your own, consulting company where you're assisting others in scaling their businesses by using the right technology, strategies, partnerships, products, by leveraging edge computing, IoT, 5G, AI, maybe some other
All the
notable
goodies.
innovations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there any one particular tech innovation that businesses are most excited or curious about? And I guess,
Hmm.
like, also, like, what are some, common challenges that some of the
Yeah.
businesses are encountering when they're
Mhm.
adopting these cutting edge technologies that maybe they weren't using prior?
Yeah. But I think the thing that's the glamorous thing that everyone's excited about today that I hear about on a daily basis is around AI.
I
AI,
could have guessed
is,
that.
yeah, I mean, it's like consumed all the oxygen in the room. Okay, good. So at least we're talking about, leveraging technology. So there's, edge AI and AI vision and detecting, a hot dog, not a hot dog kind of stuff. And then there's the large language model AI where you're, creating cat poems on the fly, whatever. So businesses are always like, okay, what should I do with this? Yeah, a few years ago, I used to talk to people about 5G. They're like, well, okay, there's this thing called 5G. How is this going to help my business? Now they're talking about AI and, where should I apply AI and the models and all that stuff. And so I think there's a lot of thinking about that. And, we tend to, radically overestimate the impact in the short term and radically underestimate the impact in the long term. I think that's been said. And so I think maybe people get a little too breathless about AI in the near term, but maybe don't realize about the longer term impacts that it's going to have. Um, so there's a lot of discussion around that, and I think for businesses, you always have to think about your outcomes, right? So it's like, what exactly do you want to accomplish? Do you want, more efficiency over your kind of labor costs? Do you want, um, you know, expansion or lower costs overall to your business or a better customer experience? Like, what are you trying to achieve as an outcome? And then let's kind of go back and figure out how to make that happen. And maybe AI is part of that, or maybe it isn't. But if you start with the tech, you're probably going to get in trouble. It's like, well, I want to do something with AI. So that's kind of, it sounds like a doomed project to me. It's more like, well, I want to have a great customer experience where my VIPs are recognized and they have a personalized experience when they come in the door. Okay, cool. Well, AI might be part of that, maybe. So that's kind of the conversations that typically people are having. But yeah, AI is kind of like you know, it's the it thing, and it's pretty profound.
It's so interesting you mentioned that last part where you said, well, AI may be part of it, because I thought of something as you were talking. I was about to ask you, do you think that companies or businesses are asking the right questions when they want to implement AI, or is it more of a matter of they sort of just want to jump on the bandwagon because it's this exciting new
Right.
thing that everybody's talking about it? How can we include it? What can we do
Yeah.
with it? Why
Sure,
aren't we
their
already
boards and
using it?
their leadership are asking them, "What's our AI strategy?" So I think every company should have an answer, and that strategy could be wait and see. Or that strategy could be, well, we're going to use it on our manufacturing line to do product inspection, or that answer could be where we're going to use it for like help agents to augment our helpline so people can chat with chatbots. So I think every company needs an AI strategy, and so it's a totally legit question to ask. It's just you don't want to sort of tumble into it to saying, well, we need to do something with AI, because you may not need to immediately, depending on what your business outcomes are and your I call it sort of the envelope, the ROI envelope, right? So you want a return on investment. It needs to fit inside that envelope. Um, so you can't maybe afford to spend 10 million bucks to get that result, right? It has to fit. You might have $1 million to spend or less. So solving problems, solving for outcomes inside of an ROI envelope is super challenging, and sometimes you use some tech and sometimes you wait, and it kind of depends.
So I know on your website, I was looking at some of I'm calling them blog posts. I know you call them
Sure.
edge notes, very
My
on
edge
brand.
notes. Yeah.
And
Trying.
so something that I happen to also agree with is that the tech industry is pretty infamous for these hype cycles, and 5G has not been an exception to that. However, even amid the hype, there are real opportunities for businesses, to transform, particularly with private 5G networks,
Mm.
which you addressed. So one of the posts that I happened to read was titled Plumbing, Electrical, HVAC, and 5G. You
Right.
mentioned this concept of tech hype and also how tech matures over time, which I loved. And earlier in the article, you noted, I'm just going to read this:
Okay.
5G is the poster child for deep technology innovation and massive overhype. And then later you continue, but out of that tech came some real opportunities for businesses to accelerate their digital transformation journey, including private 5G. So I have like a
Hmm.
million questions. We're not going to address them all because we'll be
Yeah.
here all
Okay.
day. But I want to just start with this or ask you this. Could you
Sure.
maybe elaborate more or talk more about how 5G fits into this dual narrative of both innovation and hype?
Yes. The duality of
Yeah.
tech. So as I mentioned before, we always kind of overestimate the impact in the short run and underestimate it in the long run, right? So a tech comes out and everyone gets excited about it, like AI or 5G or any of these things, and we imagine all of these, jetpacks and living on the moon and all kinds of crazy stuff. Um, and yeah, it's possible, but then like practically speaking, that might take years and years. I mean, I wrote a white paper for Microsoft probably 6 or 7 years ago around 5G strategy when it was still super nascent. And I talked about network slicing as one of these things where you virtualize the network and you have guaranteed quality of service, blah blah blah. Only at the last week at Mobile World Congress did T-Mobile even announce they're going to have a beta of network slicing for developers coming up. So many years later. So you always have to sort of temper that initial hype with, well, what's the real value prop, now versus maybe 10 years from now when all these other things happen. And so that's kind of part of the deal in working in the tech business. But I think with 5G, essentially, it's really about, like I mentioned before, it's a faster network, it's a lower latency network, it's broader propagation, and in some cases, and that's what I mentioned in the document. There's a company called Freshwave in the UK who has taken private 5G into the kind of the buildings and trade business. And they've outfitted, I think, the largest skyscraper in London with their solution. So I don't know if it's 5G yet, but it's CBRS, so it's private cellular. So you imagine, when you're building out a building, you want to be able to minimize your cabling costs and other things like that. So being able to do things wirelessly would save a lot of time and money and give you a lot of agility. But they're really in the buildings business, and so that's a good example of where the tech of private 5G, which is the super complicated thing frankly, found a home, with companies like Freshwave to then say, well, we're in the buildings business. And so, when we're doing buildings now, we can make them, highly networked with high performance networking and control systems. And that's just a tool in our toolkit. So it's found its way into the toolbox of these companies. And that really is when the tech matures, right? Sort of like with the Ring doorbell. Ring originally, that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of this funky cool thing that you could buy on some funky site. Once it became a box in Home Depot on the end cap, then it was like, okay, well, that's where I buy my doorbells, and so now here I can do this, and that's when it sort of reached that level of maturity and scale. And so whenever I see new tech, I'm always thinking about, well, where is this going to actually land for customers to actually use, like AI? When's it going to be commercialized to the point where people can deploy it, without having a dozen PhDs on staff, trying to build an AI model to recognize a can of soup or something like it's as someone I used to work with at Microsoft used to say, we want to sell people solutions, not chemistry sets, right? So, so it's important.
So, we talked about AI now, we talked about it before when you brought it up. It's
Yeah.
really revolutionizing various sectors: healthcare, finance, manufacturing. I mean, that's just like a few. You know, in healthcare, that a diagnosis could be faster, more accurate because of maybe
Yeah.
X-rays or MRIs. Predictive analytics. So, in finance, I imagine it assists with fraud detection somehow. So, being that AI is a buzzword and a huge part of the conversation, we even were just talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, many Something that I just also said with you is that a lot of companies, I think, are sometimes very quick to adopt something before they're really, you know, educated on it, or have learned about it. And being that you're a consultant, you
Mm,
have the opportunity to explain to your clients why and how, AI could create a competitive advantage, or a better customer experience, for instance, or maybe why it's not the necessary technology for them to implement at this time. So I'm just
right.
curious, like, do you have any examples, that your consulting company has successfully implemented AI solutions, or like a favorite project that you've been a
Right.
part of, recently, like a really awesome story you could share?
Yeah. I mean, so all my engagements are heavily NDA'd. So, I can't kind of
Yes.
sort of spill the beans on too much. But
Fair, fair.
I would say that, what I've seen some really interesting uses of AI and AI vision. AI vision, is fascinating, right? Because it's using the camera as another set of eyes to do something. I've seen a lot of interesting ideas around and some, proof of concepts for AI for in like quick serve restaurants. So you think about the Taco Bells and the KFCs and the McDonald's and things. Um, how do you use AI there to be smarter about resources, whether those are food resources, time resources, labor resources. One of the things that I had heard. It's funny when you work with customers, they tell you these interesting business insights that you were like, I had no idea. But you've probably gone through the drive-through before. You go through the drive-through
Mhm.
and you get your bag of whatever, and you drive off, and then you look at it and it's the wrong stuff, right? You got the wrong bag. Super frustrating. Turns out that that's kind of a double whammy because someone else got your bag. So now two customers are unhappy, right? And it ends up it'll cost a quick serve restaurant, hundreds of millions of dollars a year,
Mhm.
because then they have to, give them the right order. So now they're doubling the food and the times two customers. So it's a big problem, right? And so there was a customer that was implementing a system where they would basically have an AI vision camera above where the workers were putting stuff in bags, and it would be able to detect like hamburger, French fries, whatever, and be able to say, is the right food going in the right bag for the right order? And if it wasn't, they had like a yellow, red, green light for the worker, and if it wasn't, it was misplaced. The red light would go on, or yellow light, or whatever, to say, hey, go check that bag, go check the bag. And so it was really cutting down dramatically on the wrong bag scenario for quick serve restaurants using an AI vision camera just to sort of imagine if you had another person kind of watching you put stuff in bags and saying, hey, by the way, I think you put two French fries in there. You only needed one. So that was
Can I
kind of
ask you a
interesting. It
quick
was like,
can I ask you a
yeah,
quick question? Just as a comparison, I don't know if you have an Amazon Fresh near you. I've actually never been in one. I have one right here, so I don't know why I haven't. But it's
yeah,
my understanding that it sounds like it's almost a similar concept, but camera based, where it recognizes, I guess you have to scan, when you go into the store,
yeah,
your Amazon code, and that it recognizes when you take things off the shelf and it just
right. And you don't
automatically
have to
adds to your
pay.
cart.
Right.
Um,
So you
I
don't
wish
have to
now that we're
punch
having
out.
this conversation, I really wish I had been in one, and I'm kind of curious. And now I want to go in one
Yeah.
because I'm curious the technology that the stores use. I just haven't had a need to go other than being curious. I wonder if I know it's not the same, but I wonder if it's a similar concept of like this
Hmm.
camera recognizing
Well, I
what's
mean,
eating.
it's much more technology intensive to do
Yeah, I'm
it to do
sure.
that kind of full store experience. This is much more of like, very specific, and the AI model is trained on specific food items to detect orders, and you're
True.
matching up the order with the thing, and there's only so many things on the menu, so it's a
Right.
little more constrained, a lower cost, right,
Right.
implementation for a very specific purpose, but it's using AI vision to help double check, the fast food worker to make sure the right food's in the right bag, which saves hundreds of millions of dollars, yada yada yada. So that's great. So that's one of my favorite ones because I hadn't even thought of that, even though we all experience that whole experience, thing where you get the wrong bag. But yeah, no, there's the AI vision stuff. I mean, obviously it's used for security and, all these other things. And there's a lot of ethical issues around, face recognition and other things like that. But it's being used more and more for, manufacturing inspection on assembly lines for defects, freshness of food, counting of inventory. A lot of this stuff is now much more automated through AI vision and low cost cameras and sensors that can sort of see, maybe not super high resolution, but enough to sort of see what's going on and sort of keep track of what's happening. So I think that's a big one that is being used by retailers and manufacturing and industrial companies a lot. So one of my
I wonder
favorites.
if I haven't thought about it until now, until we had this conversation, but I wonder if any airports use any AI technology, especially like when you're scanning through security. I don't know the
Well, I've
answer
seen like
here.
Delta's done a little face scan thing, like it'll recognize your face. I don't know. Does that really help? I guess so. I mean,
I have
just
no
swipe the thing.
idea.
So I don't know if that saves a couple of seconds or whatever. I'm sure there are ways to look at patterns of human movement to detect anomalies, right? If someone's running or so there's someone moving in a certain way that might be, hey, check out
Unusual.
zone 3 here. Maybe something's going on. I'm sure that that's happening. But there's actually a good book called Going Zero that I
Going
just read.
zero.
I think Andrew McCartan, but it's about, a contest to sort of stay off the grid and stay undetected for 30 days. If you stay undetected for 30
Ooh,
days, you win $3 million. And it's a contest run by the US government and kind of a Zuckerberg type character who has this social network, and they team up to sort of predictively figure out where people are at. And it's pretty, obviously it's a novel, it's science fiction, but kind of pretty realistic. Use of all the signals, all the little trails that you're leaving in the world today, through closed caption television and credit cards and all kinds of things that are sort of make you very detectable. So,
unreal.
man, it's kind of spooky. Not that unreal, unfortunately. So
You're right. You're right. I really shouldn't have said that actually when we think about
yeah,
it, but
so the
it
notion of
gets more
privacy when you get into it
crazy.
is kind of a
Yeah.
whole other discussion. But no, I think that there's so using AI to sort of I like to think of it as like AI as a superpower, adding a superpower to an employee is fantastic. Replacing employees, not as good. But supercharging them to make them, less mistakes or, to be able to do more, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of place for it when it comes to efficiency, productivity, reducing errors. There are for sure ways where it could act as a useful tool
Yeah,
as an additive, I guess, if you want to look at it that way.
exactly. Hopefully it's all
Okay,
additive.
we have covered such a wide range of
Yeah, I know.
topics, your experiences, technological advancements, maybe some challenges in adopting technology,
Hmm.
the significance of edge computing, private 5G networks, and of course, the impact of AI. How could we forget that?
Of
Um,
course.
in your extensive career journey, including your consulting company, you've witnessed and contributed to the evolution of technology across various domains. Do you think you could share your vision for the future of technology and how the convergence of all of these innovations
How does it
um,
all
will kind of
work?
impact, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like our next 10 years or,
Yeah.
the
Well,
more
here's the
immediate
thing. Like,
future?
yeah, the thing that's kind of on my mind, and I actually wrote a paper about this to an edge note about this.
I'll have to read it.
And I think we start to need to noodle on it is the environmental, kind of the collision of environmental resources and tech. And I think that's a hot topic for me, and hopefully it will be for everyone. And the fact is, we don't have enough electricity and water, frankly, to power our tech. We're talking about AI and AI workloads, to do that cat poem that we talked about is going to burn a lot of electricity and a lot of water for cooling, a lot of groundwater. And if you look at the curves, the appetite for running high performance workloads is kind of skyrocketing. And as you know, our environmental resources are not skyrocketing. In fact, I was at MWC last week, and someone said essentially we are consuming enough resources as a population for like 2 Earths. So we like need another Earth, basically, or we need to really dial down our consumption of electricity and water and other resources. Never mind all of the kind of mining and other minerals we need to do batteries and things like that. So that's kind of like, I mean, that's kind of a little dark, but I'm concerned that we are not the lines are not converging. They're kind of going this way. And I think we need to really be much smarter and more transparent about the environmental resources being used by tech so that people can make informed decisions about when to use it and when not to use it. And so, if I know that every time I do a cat poem, I'm kind of, killing 3 trees, maybe I won't do the cat poem. So we need to think about that. And there are some really good initiatives out there in terms of water recycling and lower power silicon and alternative fuels, hydrogen and things like that. But it's going to be, speaking of next 10 years, that's kind of really the challenge for the next 10 years is how do we actually maintain and improve the technology ecosystem while balancing our environmental resources. So I think that's kind of top of mind for me.
Such an excellent point that I don't think enough people think of, when it comes to using technology and adopting technology. I mean, I just
Right.
think I don't even have, in theory, that much tech happening right now, but between my light and my mic and my laptop, which is connected to Wi-Fi, which is probably connected to something else. I mean, that's a lot of energy that
A
I'm
lot of
using just
energy.
in this hour that we're on the phone, and I'm one
Yeah.
person. So
Right.
now shift to something like an enterprise, where the
Sure.
technology is
Right. And
beyond.
data centers, big
And
giant data centers that are multiple football fields and they're springing up like weeds around the world. In fact, there's some countries like Singapore has a moratorium on data centers. So you're not allowed to build one in there anymore because they don't have enough electricity to power any more data centers. They need the public grid to power people's houses. So yeah, so that's kind of a tricky one that we need to figure out. And, um, it's just something we need to be more cognizant of. And hopefully that as a society evolve with this tech that becomes more normalized, we are also kind of thinking about the footprint and impact that it's having on the bigger picture.
I'm certainly going to be thinking about that after our chat. It's an
Good, good.
important conversation to have that we probably should encourage more people to have.
Yeah, yeah. And, so I wrote that paper on as an edge note on edgecelsior.com about it. I also created, and this is kind of a little fun thing, is I created a series of TikToks that explain that problem and challenge. So it's like a 5-part series on TikTok of videos that talk about I think I called it AI's environmental Armageddon, which is a little bit dark, but you know, what's happening there and how do we do better. But so if you go on TikTok or my YouTube channel or whatever, you can see that if you don't feel like reading.
But
Not
I
everyone
think
likes to
that's so
read.
awesome. I mean, look at what you
Yeah.
just did. You are leaning into so many different methods of content to reach different people because not everybody wants to read an edge note and not everybody
Right.
wants to be on TikTok. So now you've
That's
given
right.
everybody an opportunity to find this information, but in a way they want to consume it.
Right.
So bravo to you.
Thank you. Well, the Venn diagram overlap of LinkedIn and TikTok is like zero, basically. So I figured, well, I'll do the LinkedIn crowd. You get the edge note, and it's nice. But then I will slice and dice it with some cool heavy metal music and put it on TikTok for everybody else. So
So that was
we'll
going to
see.
actually be my very last question. You just
Oh,
answered
okay.
part of it. If anybody wants to reach out to you or find you,
Yes.
what is the best way for them to do it? I know you just
Well,
mentioned TikTok, but what's your TikTok handle,
y-
I guess? Do you know?
at Edge Celsior, at Edge Celsior. But if you go to edgecelsior.com, you can get to me. You can contact me. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe there. You can see I have a podcast show called the Excelsior Show as well, and you can reach my TikTok and all that other good stuff. But excelsior.com is kind of the landing point, and you can then go and you can actually read documents if you like reading, or you can watch musical videos of the same content if you wanted.
Thanks so much, Pete. We're going to be sure to
Sure.
share all of that in our show notes also.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate the questions and the thoughtfulness that you put behind it.
100%. And I look forward to more conversations off the podcast in the future.
Sounds good. All right.
Talk
Thanks.
soon.